Hello, Tua. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you this morning, Miriam?
I'm doing well. And so we are here today to bring you another conscious conversation from Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling. And so we have these conscious conversations, often talking about mental health wellness topics. And so today our topic will be around resilience. And so we'll be talking about everything around resilience. Tua and I will both be sharing, our thoughts, some practices, and also resources around resilience and what that looks like for us as individuals, us as families, and then also us as a community. And so, before we get started, we'll do a brief introduction. And so, my name is Maryam Abdallah, and I'm a therapist with Nashville Emotional Wellness. I see individuals, couples, and families. And I primarily work with women and the LGBTQ community, but also open to working with, again, different individuals, couples, and families. I utilize dialectical behavior therapy primarily, and from an empowerment and trauma informed lens. And so, Tua, would you like to share briefly about the work that you do for New?
Absolutely. So, my name is Tua Bolgi. I'm also a therapist at New, and I work also with individuals, families, and couples. Primarily, my work has been with individuals and families. I do a lot of work as well with children and adolescents. And so, I use a lot of different modalities: trauma informed, cognitive behavioral therapy, expressive arts therapy, and just really like to work to empower and collaborate with my clients to help them towards healing. So glad to be here with you today, Mariam.
Yes, thank you so much. And so before we end today, we will definitely share how people can connect with us at Nashville Emotional Wellness. Um, but now let's get into the topic around resilience.
Mhm.
And so definitely felt like we should start out defining resilience for our viewers. And so, how would you define resilience?
It was interesting when I was looking at this topic. There's so many different ways that a person can look at resilience. So I thought I would kind of share with us a few definitions that I found from different therapists and researchers. So Amy Maston, who is at the University of Minnesota, she says that resilience is the capacity of a person to adapt successfully to challenges that threaten the function, survival, or future development of the person. And
Mm.
then another good definition of resilience is the capacity of a person to maintain her core purpose and integrity in the face of change. And a third one that I thought was really interesting as well is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, or tragedy, such as family relationship problems, serious health problems, and workplace or financial stressors. The ability to bounce back from difficult experiences. Miriam, how would you define resilience for yourself?
And so resilience for me means absolutely the probably the last one you just stated. So the bounce back. To me, it's about, bouncing back from anything that's hard in your life, to put it in simple terms. So, something difficult happens, there's a conflict, there's a situation that brings again trauma or just is distressing to you. The ability to say, I can deal with this situation. It's hard. I don't like it. I don't want to be here. And I know that I need to move forward. I need to figure out a way to get through this, to process this, but then be able to show up and function my best self. I loved one of the definitions that you shared about showing up in yourself. So being able to get back to your daily routine, your daily function, and your window of tolerance, where you feel good at. And so, yeah, I would say the bounce back. I like that as resilience, bouncing back. And it gives me a good picture of what I need to do. And so it's literally like, yeah, this doesn't feel good, but I can bounce. Like my body, my mind, my family, people around me, we can bounce back up. Um, and so yeah, that would be my definition for resilience. Yeah.
I love what you said, Mariam, about the that idea of being able to hold those two things in your head at the same time. That yes, I'm in this situation that might not be great, and I'm coping and I'm dealing, but I also know what my optimal situation looks like, and I know what I need to do to get there. I think that's such a useful skill that our
Mhm.
clients can develop is that ability to hold both of those ideas in their hand as they're working through towards getting back to their optimal functioning. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, for me, resilience, I agree. I think it's about that bouncing back. And it's also really about kind of highlighting and finding our own internal strengths. You know, what are those things that we are inherent to us that we might not have to put into practice all the time, but that when we encounter stressors, just really come in useful. And sometimes those aren't, we're not even able to identify them until we're in a moment of stress, right? And then we find those
Mhm.
internal strengths. And also being able to kind of look around us and saying, okay, what are my external supports? Who's out there that I know I can lean on in this moment? I always like to think of the Glennon Doyle has a phrase where she says, we can do hard things. And what I always tack on is, yes, we can do hard things, but we don't have to do them alone, right?
Yeah.
So remembering that resilience, yes, it's all of that strength and courage within ourselves, but it's also, the people around us, our loved ones, our family, our community. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that. I love Glennon Doyle. Absolutely. We can do hard things with help. And so I love how you have revised that to include that help. One thing I would challenge our viewers to do is to define resilience for yourself. And so, what does resilience mean to you so that you have to have the definition and the meaning for it? Then it helps you when you're in those situations when things aren't going so great and you need to recover or bounce back or get back to a space that feels good to you. You can do that easier if you've built that foundation, if you've built that definition and said, resilience looks like this for me, and really applying it to everyday life, what's going on with you, things that have happened in the past, thinking about that, thinking about your family, thinking about your community around resilience. So it sets you up. It's kind of like being preventative because we know things will happen. There, bad things will happen, challenges will come, hard times will come. But if we are preventative in saying, yeah, I'm ready for that because I've already defined resilience. I've already looked to see what it means to me and how it showed up in my life. And then, like you said, I already know the skills, the tools, the resources that I can pull from.
that's
So, yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
I agree so much with that. I love the idea of developing that toolbox, right? Having that toolkit with
Mhm.
you so that in that moment, you're not grasping for things. You already know. I know mindfulness really helps me when I'm stressed out. So I know that's something I can reach for and that the practice is already there. Gratitude is another one that always helps me out when I'm feeling those moments of just hardness in my life. And so having that toolbox and prepping beforehand, I think is such a good practice so that, in the moment of hard stress or difficulty, you're not wondering, what do I do? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for defining that. I think that's some good information for us to take around the definition of resilience and really digging into that for ourselves.
Mhm.
But also today, I would like to share with the viewers some examples. And so, examples around resilience, what it looks like in our personal lives, what it looks like, in working with clients, or even in just professional work that you've done in the past. Can you share some examples, some hard examples to say, this is what happened and this is how that person, quote, bounced back?
Absolutely. When I think of resilience, I can't help but think of one of my clients who is 15.
Mhm.
And he experienced a lot of loss over the course of a year through COVID. And every time I talk to him, we've been doing a lot of work around exactly like we mentioned, sort of building that toolbox and really looking within ourselves to figure out, okay, what are my strengths? What can I count on? Um, and it was so helpful for him as he was working through the healing process and figuring out, as you mentioned, how to get back to that optimal functioning where he could feel joy and enjoy his life again. Was to think about, okay, what are these things that I do anyway that can bring me back to that level? And, for him, it was his connection with music. And so he really, he used music as a point of empowerment, as just a way, structured place to hold his feelings that felt too big for him to hold. And he also did such a great job with help again to reach out to his family and his community members and realize that even though he lost a parent and a grandparent with in short succession, and it took him a minute, but to realize, hey, there are other people here who love me and, will help me and take care of me. So just that shift in perspective, I think, can really help when you're trying to bounce back from something, and be resilient. So that's what I think of when I think of a client case. And then for me personally, we all have stressors in our lives. I have so many different experiences, but one that particularly comes to mind is I was in the middle of a grad school semester and my father passed away unexpectedly. And it was very easy to sort of fall into this feeling of everything's out of my control. I can't do anything, and just kind of sit in that because you feel so helpless in moments like that when stressful, unexpected things happen. And for me, what was so helpful again is to lean into that gratitude at the moment. What is in my life that brings me joy? What is it in my life that I'm grateful for? And using that as a bridge back to, a normalcy, but also a new perspective, a renewed perspective of myself in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah. What about you? What do you think about?
Yeah, thank you for sharing. First, thank you for sharing those examples, and being, vulnerable in that space. I would say probably one of my personal examples is right along with your personal example, because I was thinking like, what are some of the toughest times? And as you said, we've had a lot of stressors and hard times, but I would say, probably the loss of my mother when I was in graduate school as well many years ago. Probably was one of the toughest, and it wasn't just because I was in graduate school. It was I was a young adult, and so in that, I think I did the same as you. Definitely was grateful for the memories and the years that I did, have with her, and it brought. I think it brought our family, and so my siblings. I have a huge family. My siblings, my stepdad, my nieces and nephews. It brought us much closer and helped us to learn to definitely appreciate life more, to not, take things for granted, but it definitely helped us to connect. And so finding that supporting community, finding that supporting family was how we were able to be resilient and to keep living, knowing that her spirit was still here and it was encouraging us to keep moving forward and to bounce back, not to stay in that space. And so, yeah, I can see a lot of resilience around grief and loss for, many people, but also some people have a hard time, finding that bounce back after grief and loss. And so as you were sharing, I was thinking, what are some things that if you find yourself in that space and you want to stay in that space, it's okay. It's okay to be in that space, for the amount of time that you need to be there. And as I said earlier, and go, in conjunction with that, thinking, how do I move forward? What does my future look like, without this person? they won't be there. So how do I rebuild? How do I structure in a way that still honors them, but and still brings the great memories and joy to my life, but allows me to continue living or get back to living? And so I think that is something, maybe for the viewers to take away and really think about if you find yourself in a time of grief and loss, how to get back, back to functioning, back to your good and happy place. Um, and so, yeah, that would be my personal example. Examples in the work that I've done. I've done a lot of work with children and families, and so I always found it amazing some of the resilience that the parents would have, even the children as well, because I did a lot of work with abused and neglected children and families. And so the work that they would do, some parents, to make sure that they got back on course, that they were learning how to be a better parent, because sometimes it's just about not knowing. And so you end up in a situation where you lose custody of your children because you didn't know. And
Right.
so parents that were there to say, okay, I didn't know, but I'm here to do better. I'm open to learning. I'm open to taking, these suggestions, this feedback, repositioning myself, reassessing my life so that I can be a better parent and I can get my child back in my home. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I saw resilience all the time in parents, and then in the children who
Mhm.
were, placed out of the home temporarily, and of course, wanting to be with their parents, but understanding in that time my mother or my father or both are working on something.
Mhm.
And as a family, we will be back together again. And
Mhm.
they had to be resilient in, I have to make the best of this home that I'm in for this time.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, lots of resiliency in, I would say, in the work with children and families. And so that has always encouraged me in
Mhm.
the work that I do, because I always said, if, some of these things that I would witness or, see or be a part of in that work, and they can come back from it, it reminds me I can come back from this. I can bounce back. I can get back, back up and try again. So,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing your beautiful story with us. And I think that's so true. I also, as a therapist, find so much inspiration from my clients,
Mhm.
and their courage and resilience. I
Yeah.
wanted to touch back on something you said that I think is so important. And I think that's one thing, Mariam, that you do so beautifully is, again, that, being able to hold those two things, and that it's okay to sit in the stress for a little bit, in the sadness, right? That if we're ready
Mhm.
to feel our feelings, that's a perfectly normal thing to do. And I think that's important to highlight for our listeners that, we're not always going to be quick to resilience, right? It's
Yeah.
not anyone else's timeline but your own. And so
Yeah.
I just appreciated that you brought that up, because I think that's so important. We don't ever want people to feel like, if you don't bounce back in this time period, then you don't have the capacity or you can't do it.
Right. Right. And it can lend to, I think, it can lend to resilience being um, kind of a kind of a negative kind of, or a downfall, like you're putting too much pressure on people to bounce back in a whatever your quote timely manner is. And so, and also sometimes I think just saying, where you're resilient, you can handle it, that's not what we're saying either. And so it's about finding that balance, that fine line, being delicate in, yeah, I need to bounce back, I need to come back, but I also need to be whole and ready
Mhm.
when I bounce back. So we don't want people to think, that resilience, again, that you just have to have it, or you can get through anything if you have it. And so, yeah, it's a balance of
Mhm.
sitting in this issue, this struggle, this hardship, but also knowing, looking forward and saying, when is it time? When do it's time for me to bounce back up? And it may not even be a bounce. It's time for me to slowly get back up, you
All the
know.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
I think that's lovely. And I think that it's so important. to think about it that way, that your pace is going to be your own, the way you do it is going to be your own. And so and it doesn't have to be fast, it can be in slow increments, we can take one step at a time. I know sometimes when I work with clients, they want to make these big leaps, right? And I always try to remind them we're going to get there, but that path might not always be linear, right? It might not always look like a straight line. We might weave and bob and go back and forth, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, like, what are some skills, because we've been talking about how building that toolbox is important. So, what are some skills that you like to work with clients to kind of build that resilience? What are some resiliency skills that you work with to develop?
Yeah, and so some skills that I like to share, ways to build resiliency,
Mm-hmm.
because it can be built, you can improve it, you can learn it. If you feel like you don't even know it, you can learn it. And so it's a skill that can be developed. And so I would say number one, I start with resourcing. And so I think we mentioned it earlier in some of our examples and even in the definition, but resourcing is very important. It's the knowing is the first thing, knowing that you have these things, in place, or these are the strengths that are already near you, in you, around you, available to you. And so in resourcing, I like to have the clients think about four categories that you can break down and say, here's where I can find some strength. Here's where I can find, a way to come back out. And so number one is really thinking of, where is your calm place? Where is somewhere that you can go to and it could be in your head. So this calm place in your that you create in your mind, or a physical calm place if it's, going to the park and taking a walk, or just sitting outside on your back porch and, taking in nature. Find a calm place, have a calm place in hand for you to be able to go to physically or in your mind. That's one thing. And then second is having an icon or like a person. And
Mm-hmm.
so, who is your person? Who do you look up to? Who encourages you? Who inspires you? Who will just sit with you? Who will just let you cry? Who will listen to you? Who is that person, or who are those people? So having that list on hand, it could be people before you, because it could be your ancestors. If you need to sit and get a connection and get a word or get a message from your ancestors, or again, it could be somebody very physical in your life, or it could be people that you even look up to in society. So, people that inspire you through their books, or inspire you through their writings, or, inspiration in the work that they do. And then the third one would be things that we like to call, or I like to call, pocket moments. And so they're in the therapy world called container moments, but I say pocket moments. So things that you can grab quickly. What does that look like? Something that you have in hand in your office, in your workspace. I love all your books. Things like that are feel good to me, because I know I can go to that book if I need to find a quote, if I need to read a message, that's there. Some people, it's candles. You talked about the client that it was music. He
Right.
can pop in some earbuds and listen. And so finding what you can get to quickly to give you strength. And then lastly is really about developing yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so what does your ideal self look like on the other side? When I bounce back, what do I see for myself? What do I see in my life? You know, what pieces are there that I can already access, and what do I need to build or grow or improve? So, yeah, resourcing, I would say, is an awesome tool to
Mm-hmm.
help encourage and develop resilience. Yeah. And so what tools do you share with your clients, or even in your own life, what do you like to use to make sure that resilience is prevalent and growing? Because again, we know that those times are coming.
Mm-hmm.
When they come, we want to be ready. And so what does building resilience look like for you?
Yeah, a lot of similarities. I love what you said, that piece about pocket moments and having those connecting factors right there in front of you so they're easy to grasp. I think that's one I
Mhm.
definitely share with clients. Another piece that I like to talk about today, talk about with my clients in terms of resilience, is kind of um, asking yourself about purpose, right? What is it that can make me feel purposeful today? And it doesn't, again, it doesn't have to be a great big act, right? It can be the smallest thing. Today, I might find purpose in, digging the weeds out of my garden, right? I might find purpose in connecting with my child or my friend, just calling and saying, hey, I've been thinking about you, right? It doesn't have to be something big. But I think that when we reconnect to who we are in the world, that can help us bounce back. Another tool I share is really thinking about your thinking, because sometimes, as I like to tell, especially my adolescent clients, our brains will lie to us, right? They will tell us things that, the story we tell ourselves, as Brene Brown likes to call it. So I'll have my clients ask themselves that: what story is your brain telling you right now? Well, it's
I
saying to
didn't
me,
get that. Could you try again?
excuse it's saying to me that I can't do this. I'm stuck here, right? And so really kind of taking a moment to unpack that and saying, okay, why do we feel that way? What's going on here that's making this come up for me? So kind of questioning what's going on here. And then another tool that I love to share with clients is going back to what you mentioned about the connection. So, where do I connect with people? Who are people that I can go to? What are words that bring me comfort, like you were saying, And I think that when we think about our lives in terms of those connections, we do realize, hey, I have a lot more support around me than I thought. These are opportunities I have where I can reach out when I need help. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Absolutely. I think the this kind of leads us to our probably final topic around this. But that's the connection. So belonging. And so taking that connection and belonging and shifting to what does community resilience look like?
mm,
And so oftentimes we feel kind of siloed, and that's just kind of the way of the world. We have technology, so we don't have to go anywhere. We can stay in our house and do everything. We're working from home more, and so we're not really connecting with coworkers as much. Even some activities and things that may have happened in the communities in our neighborhoods are virtual, and so that disconnection, I think, has happened over, especially more so over the last 2 years. And so, how would you say community resilience? How is it important? And then, how do we, kind of build that back up and get back to that, so that we don't feel, like we're the only ones, or we don't feel so alone.
that's right.
Mhm.
And I think it's so important because in our society too, we get caught up in self care, and self care is very important, but self care often can feel so internalized, so singular, right? And self care can
Mhm.
also be community oriented, right? We can, as
Mhm.
we've been talking about this whole time, the example you gave from your own life that was so beautiful was when your mother passed away and you said your family came back together, and what was really healing was that connection.
Mhm.
And I think that reaching out to others and helping each other through a hard time is healing. Just that process of connecting is healing. In terms of our community, I think sometimes when we're going through a hard time or someone else is going through a hard time, we can be reluctant to reach out because I don't know
Mhm.
what to say. I might say the wrong thing, you know. And I think we don't put enough weight on enough value onto just presence, right? I know that you're going through a tough time. I can't fix it, I can't change it, but I'm here, and that has so much value, is that presence, is that willingness to walk with somebody in their moment of darkness. What about you? What do you think about, Mariam, when you think about community resilience?
Yeah, so for me, community resilience, I would say, is probably more important than individual, because if I have a community, if I have that connection, if I have people that I feel like a group that I belong to, then that in itself builds that resilience in me. If I feel disconnected, if I feel alone, if I, don't feel like I fit in anywhere, it's hard to say, oh, I'm bouncing back. What am I bouncing back to? Don't really have a connection to anything or anybody. And so the biggest piece in community resilience, I would say for I know for me in my life is basically around spirituality. And
Mhm.
so where can I find that higher power, that higher being? Where can you find that higher power, that higher being, whatever it is to you, whatever you call it, whatever you name it, just having something that is bigger than you. And then you gravitate toward that community that is related to that. So, if you feel this and you agree with this, you believe this, you practice this, then you find a community that does that, that can build, up around you. And a lot of our faith based institutions, of course, play a huge part. If they're not, they should be playing a huge part in building community resilience and reminding people of the strengths that we have and how we can come together and connect and support and love one another. And so, yeah, I would say definitely spirituality and the faith based institutions within our communities are. Um, Great ways to connect and find that space. So yeah, and even in these, I would say during the pandemic, absolutely again because we felt so siloed. But even in a lot of the things that are going on in the world currently, the social injustices, police brutality, the mass shootings, when those things are going on, we have to bounce back from those as a society, as a community, as a neighborhood. And so, again, finding that soul focus or that at least some space that you all can come together and relate, creating those circles and, grieve as a whole,
That's
you
right.
know, be in that space, like we said, as a whole for however long you need to.
Mhm.
And then slowly, like you stated, slowly
Mhm.
crawl to walk to stand,
Mhm.
as a community. And it just works so much better if you can find that than trying to do it alone. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I think just to reiterate what so much of what you were saying and the wisdom in that seeking that connection, and it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be this big leap. You can reach out to someone, and I know, just when I know sometimes for myself and for my clients, when you're in the depths of that, your darker places, it can be hard to reach out. That takes a lot of courage. And so really
Mhm.
taking those small steps. And if you're thinking about a friend in your life, just call them and reach out. If you're reaching out for therapy, right, for professional help, there's so many ways that we can connect with people that, can be organic and feel good to what is right for us. But that connection piece is so important. I agree. And finding belonging in something beyond yourself can be so healing. Um,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And so with that, I think would be a great space here to share some resources around resiliency, not only within the community, but within ourselves, ways to build it. And so, do you have something for the viewers to connect with or take with them
Yes,
as
absolutely.
we end this topic?
So I have a list of 3 books that you can access, and all of the 3 books are also tied to their authors. Also have TED Talks, and so at the end of our conversation, you'll see a little pop up on a screen, and it'll give you links to all of those. So one of my favorite resources for resilience is a speaker named Karen Walron, and she works with. We've been talking about community, right? She works
Mhm.
with activists and healers and therapists, and how to help them maintain resilience as they're helping others to through hard things, right? And
Yeah, that's
she,
so important.
yeah.
Yeah.
So she has a book called The Light Maker's Manifesto. And I just want to share a quick thing from hers that I just love. She asks herself 3 grounding questions in her resilience toolbox. And the first is, how can I feel connected today? The second is, how can I feel healthy today? And the third one that we touched on earlier, how can I feel purposeful today? And so she talks about just using those 3 questions as a grounding space to start as we're bouncing back. So she's a great one. The second book I want to share with our listeners is a book on self-compassion, because I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the bouncing back piece that we don't give ourselves grace and we don't give ourselves that time to just sit in what we're feeling and acknowledge that we've been through some hard things. And so the second book is about self-compassion and self-love, and really learning to, that healing, it isn't necessarily just about being your perfect self, right? It's about loving your whole self and finding healing in that wholeness. So that's a second great resource. And then one of my favorites, a favorite among many therapists, is Miss Brene Brown. We love her. But her book about rising strong is all about really looking, as we've been talking about, internally and externally. How do we find those strengths within ourselves to bounce back when things get hard, and how do we find those strengths in our community? So those are 3 great resources, and like I said, you'll see at the end of our conversation a little pop-up that has the links to all the books and all the TED Talks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tua. Such a wealth of information. Sounds very holistic and well-rounded in covering, different spaces for everyone at different times. And so, yeah, thank you for those resources. And so, if you all, as our listeners or viewers, have any questions for us around the topic of resilience, please feel free to enter those into the chat box. You can leave us comments, you can ask a question, and we will be sure to get back with you. If we don't directly, definitely someone from Nashville Emotional Wellness will connect with you and try our best to answer or share in a way that is helpful to you all. And so, thank you so much, Tua, for this conversation. It has been great, enlightening, and again, I always love to take something from these conversations, even though we're sharing, I like to take things from them with me. So thank you for giving me things to take back and, process and work on and think about for myself. So do you have any last words or anything you want to leave the viewers with as we close?
Just reiterating that moment of gratitude. I appreciate you taking the time this morning, and it's always so wonderful just really digging deep and finding all of those similarities. And we all go through this process of hard things, and so we're all in it together, and finding those points of resilience and connection, I think, is healing. So that's been wonderful. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome, and thank you. And so, as we close, again, this is a conscious conversation being brought to you by Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling. And so, we have a host of therapists and interns that specialize in mental health wellness. And so, you can reach out to us and find us. Pretty much on every social media platform: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And so, as well as maybe in Twitter. And so, in those spaces, we are new. So, it's NEW, and it's Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling. You can find us on of course, the internet under Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling. And you can contact us via our webpage. You can give us a call. The information is there. You can send us an email, or you can fill out a contact form online, and we will reach out to you and get you started. We'll hold your hand. We'll give you that support to help you on your journey of whatever you're looking for, whether it's a bounce back and being resilient, or it's just trying to transition and learn more about yourself and figure out this thing called life that we all are doing. And so we would love to hear from you all. Contact us again. Tua, great therapists here at New, as well as myself, as well as, like I said, we have a host of other great, amazing, brilliant therapists. And so, thank you for joining us and taking the time to sit with us today. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
We look forward to hearing from you.